Today will be a special episode on my new training course, which is about one of my favorite anti-Sicilian weapons, and it is called Silence the Sicilian, Win with the Alapin Variation. So we'll take a look at some of the games and some of the setups today. And it starts with e4, c5, the regular Sicilian, and now there is a solution to all major Sicilian lines, which is simply playing c3 on move 2. So whether your opponent plays the Nidor, Taimanov, Dragon, any of these variations, the Alapin lets you kind of play your game starting from move 2. So what was your experience with the Alapin, Arne, and have you heard much of it before?
Well, I know, for example, so I'm not the Sicilian player. I have a couple of systems against the Sicilian, but the Alapin I really looked into because your course came out just very recently and with great success. A lot of people already enjoy it apparently. And well, of course, they understand that you're a great teacher. It is fun to listen to you, and you are really taking your time to explain a lot of variations. This was a long course. You took so much energy into this, and I think it is quite complicated because the Alapin you can play so many different things. I have one single experience. This was last year when we were in Biel, and it was Harsha Bharatakoti, grandmaster from India, who made a 60-minute course about this very line with bishop d3, which is absolutely crazy and funky. And it was quite mind blowing to me because the positions he was showing were spectacular. So, yeah, I'm very curious what awaits me with the Alapin, and I'm very happy to open my repertoire against the Sicilian a bit more because, as I said, I have three things which I play against c5, and it's better to know a bit more.
Mm-hmm. That is super cool. And yeah, bishop d3 is one of those lines that leads to just super untypical positions at first glance, but they are super interesting. And of course, many strong players play it as well. So in my course, it's mostly with d4.
Mhm.
So you play that first, and bishop d3 maybe comes a bit later, but not in the same way at all. So how about I give a brief overview of all the chapters, and then I'll show one model game from the
Love
course.
that. Yes, please.
Okay.
Let's go.
So let's look at all of Black's replies very quickly. Let's say G6. First of all, maybe more of a dragon type of accelerated dragon type
But
of thing.
often played, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, this is chapter one, and this is how I actually started playing the Alapin
Hmm.
myself, because the opponent was always playing this, and I found the Alapin as sort of a response to it. So now D4 is what I recommend. And then generally you get this good center, and if black doesn't challenge it, then you're just going to be much better. So instead, there's usually D5 and now E5. And we get a more close type of positions. Oftentimes white gets a pawn storm on the king side, and we go on to play that. And I explain it, of course, much more. So that's against G6. Now
Okay,
let's
I
go
love
to
pawn, what was it?
storms.
Storms. Thank you.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
who
this is
doesn't?
probably interesting for me. Yeah.
So then e6, let's say. This one will lead to somewhat of a French type of positions because that's what black did with their pawn structure as well. So we
True.
play d4 almost basically always. That's the response. And now I recommended in the course to take and play knight to f3. Very similar to the French, some ideas with bishop b5, castling. There's lots of things and lots of things to know about pawn structures here as well, rather than the theory itself, especially the isolated queen pawn structures. Then let's look at knight c6. So basically just all of possible black's moves. These are all the chapters and this is how they're separated. Once again, just playing d4 in the center. And if black goes for this challenging the center again, then we play knight c3. And this is somewhat of an exchange Slav in a strange way. But if they ever take, then we can even advance our pawn and start attacking the knight like that. So
It is funny how it turns out that the Sicilian players are losing their Sicilian ability very quickly with this opening.
yeah, if they play something like that, for sure, it can transpose into other things. So so yeah. Now d6 is a very possible move as
Yeah.
well, but it's not quite what d6 players usually want because on basically on any capture, you can recapture with the pawn itself, and that gives the center. That's not quite the same Sicilian structure as taking back with a knight like you do in the open Sicilian. So that's that. That's d6. There's a few more untypical lines, and I cover them all in the same chapter. Lines like e5, b6, queen a5. So they're strange, but they exist. E5, definitely something to be dealt with because you get very different types of positions than usual. They remind me of e4,
Oh,
e5,
yes.
personally. They're a bit weird,
True. It
but
goes Italian paths here.
yeah, but still, it has some very nice tactics to know and to try to catch your opponent in. And then there's also b6, to which you just respond d4, play in the center. Queen a5 is a funny one because you kind of are not allowed to recapture with the pawn if you play
Difficult.
d4, and that is just slightly annoying. But of course, there's uh, answers to that as well. You would just play knight f3, and later you can even play moves like a3, so that basically you want to play d4 anyways, and then play b4 to recapture with the pawn after
Ah,
all of that.
nice.
And now we get to the two main chapters, which is going to be chapter 6 and 7. And that is about two of the most common moves, most common replies from black. It is d5 and knight to f6. They're by far the moves that you're going to see the most
Oh,
often when you play the Alapin, because they're the main lines. So starting with d5, this is the most open type of game that you'll ever get in the Alapin and in this type of Sicilian. And I have separated it into a few parts. There's a few main setups. So as white, you would take, and play d4. And I won't go too into the setups because actually our model game is going to be from this variation as well.
perfect.
But there's setups with bishop going to g4. There's ones with e6 instead, and there's also sidelines. And these knights usually go here and here, basically no matter what. These are their spots. But e6 or bishop g4 is a question. Also, which order you kind of play all of these is a question. So there's definitely some sidelines there too.
Hmm.
But that's kind of what that big chapter covers. And then when it comes to knight to f6, this is the last one, but is also one of the most important ones. And there's a few parts to it. So when the knight comes out here, our pawn is attacked right away, so we have to push it and then play d4. And that's the type of pawn structure that we'll deal with a lot in that chapter. And a few options for black is whether they want to go for d6, undermining our pawn structure, whether they want to go for e6, whether they play knight c6 first. So those are kind of the few parts that are mostly covered, and some sidelines there as well. But that is also one of the main lines against the Alapin that people play. But if you notice, both d5 and knight f6 are sort of not very typical Sicilian type of moves that maybe
Yeah.
black would have wanted to do. Let's say they're a Nidor player, they probably would not have played either one of these moves so early. But that's why, kind of, especially if you just start playing the Alapin, I really like the fact that you're playing your own game right away, and you can be ready for all of these responses and hopefully have more experience in them than the opponents do if you look into the Alapin a bit more.
Very nice indeed. My God, so many options. It is it in a more aggressive opening, or are you fighting for a certain, yeah, center control and pawn structure?
I would say if I had to pick a category, it would be more on the solid side.
Hmm.
But that's also more, I would say, on the highest levels where they've known all this theory for a long time, and to
Sure.
them maybe a position might look solid and simple, but yeah, there's some lines that are more sort of calm and you're just playing for a positional advantage, but there's some that are very aggressive, and I like the aggressive ones, so I included some of the like more aggressive ones if there
Hmm.
was ever a choice. But yeah, maybe most people would say it's on the solid side, but yeah, it can be safe, but it can be aggressive as well, depending on what you choose in some variations.
All right, time to check out the model game, right?
Yeah, so this one, the one I wanted to show,
Oh my God, that is such a great model game. My goodness, I
yeah,
didn't
it was also
know.
featured in the course, but it has huge history behind it. So look at the names. I don't know if, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. It's Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov. My goodness,
Yeah.
1996. What a history. What a
Yeah.
chess-based history, of course.
Yes,
Frederick
that
Friedel,
too.
our co-founder, was part of this. So, yeah.
I even left his annotations in the game when that I included in the course.
Oh, how
So
nice. This is so
so
cool.
he was there to experience all of that.
Oh,
That's true.
perfect. Okay.
So
That's a
yeah,
nice treat.
it was a historic match. Back then, world champion Garry Kasparov was playing against a supercomputer named Deep Blue, and Kasparov won the first match that was in Philadelphia in 1996. That's the game that we'll look at. And then Deep Blue won their 1997 rematch by a very small margin. And back then, the computer's win was seen as very significant because it was basically the first time, I want to say, that the computer defeated a human genius in such a way. So now, of course, computers are so far ahead that this match would not even take place, but it is very cool that just 30 years ago, the impact was just starting.
Absolutely. And how funny the computer chose the Alapin after
In
all.
the first game of the match, the computer chooses the Alapin variation with c3. And Kasparov back then and was one of the main experts in the Sicilian itself. Though he was a very attacking player, so the deep blue team chose a solid line that was not would not go into one of Gary's preparations or something that he would usually be playing against.
Mhm.
So here Kasparov chooses one of the most open lines, d5, the one that we talked
Yeah.
about. Now as white we take, queen takes and play d4. Now black has a few setups, like I've mentioned before. The most popular ones are bishop g4 or e6. That's kind of the main choice that black takes in these positions. And here he chose to go for the bishop g4 line. So first, of course, you develop the knights. Knight goes to f3, supporting the center, and now bishop to g4.
So I
What
quickly
do you
need
think?
I need to ask one question, of
Yeah,
course, because it's on my mind the whole time. It looks just
right.
so tempting to, instead of playing the knight and the other knight, why don't you just take on d4 and it's a isolated queen's pawn, right? Or am I wrong?
Yes, so usually when things like that happen, oftentimes black is going to take, they're going to take just a bit later. But
Ah, because you don't have to take yet. You can take you can play knight f3 or something like this.
well, I don't know, there's some check that maybe you
Oh,
don't
true.
want to deal
Yeah.
with, but maybe it's fine to sacrifice that pawn.
Yeah, maybe not.
Usually, though, you take back with a pawn, and the point is that it opens up that c3 square for the knight,
Hmm.
and then the queen gets kicked off, and white gets sort of some momentum on their piece development.
Thank
So
you. Okay.
that's usually what, of course, in return, black gets this isolated queen pawn, which, as an Alapin player, you'll see isolated queen pawns are often going to happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes on your side, sometimes on the opponent's side, very often on white's side. But yeah, we usually in this line, it also comes with a drawback that you get knight c3 with a good tempo in and
And
increasing
and if
some
if you
development.
if you search for Svetlana's smart moves and isolate the queen's pawn, we have at least two episodes, if not more,
Yeah.
which are very fascinating, very often watched, by the way, I think as well. Okay, let's get back to the game. Sorry.
Oh, good. So no, it's a very valid question to ask that because it's a very common pawn structure that you
Mhm.
will get. So Kasparov chose this bishop g4 line, and I wanted to ask what you think White's usual plans are in these positions.
Well, we have this nasty pin, so and it's a really nasty because not only the bishop, it's also the queen pointing to there. So I guess our bishop goes either to e2 or gives a check on b5, one of those two. And the
Mhm.
knight goes to d2 as well. I think we have to tackle that. This is interesting. They have to probably really know some theory because it already looks wild to me.
Mhm.
I then you must know the theory. I don't feel comfortable with white at the moment.
Okay, no, that's totally fair. You're right about bishop to e2. And basically, the later plans are also to castle, sometimes play h3, and if you wait for black to take, then you put your knight to c3. So I wouldn't commit to knight
Okay.
d2 just yet. But for now, just bishop here, knight c3, and then you bring the rooks in. And oftentimes, right now, maybe like you said, it looks a bit uncomfortable with the pin, but usually it's kind of white who has more space and sort of the development on the easy side, where you don't really need to wonder where the pieces go as long as you just know it once.
I see. I see. Yeah, there's
But
a
yeah, of
yeah.
course, knowing theory helps more than just knowing the plans, but I kind of try to give a bit of both in the course where you do have the theory if you need, but if you sort of forget it, then you know generally with some arrows where the pieces are going to go
Hmm.
anyways. So one thing to mention though is d takes c5. Maybe that's something that can be like tempting to just win a pawn like that, but I wouldn't say it's a very like glamorous choice because you kind of are under pressure from the opponent and their pieces, and you have to calculate this e4 h3 line.
Wow.
So this is some sort of theory, but I think it's better to keep it more complicated and less forcing already right off the bat with just bishop to e2. So fast forwarding a few moves with what I mentioned, just castling, putting some pieces in the center like that. And now, once the bishop moves to e3, you are threatening to take on on c5 because then there's also the queen trade that's being
Yeah,
threatened, and
exactly.
this bishop is supporting it. So now black is kind of has to take, or else their pawn structure will get ruined, or they lose a pawn.
Oh, but how to take back with the pawn?
And now
Okay.
we recapture, and you see that now knight c3 is coming with once again that tempo. Now Garry plays a surprising move. He studied this line, bishop to b4, before playing it and prepared it
Uh-huh.
in this Alapin variation. Normally, bishop e7 is would be considered because you keep the bishop rather than trade it like rather than keep it here, and you keep it kind of on the defensive side towards the black king. But he played this instead, and upon a3, the bishop goes back, and now knight to c3. So the goal for black was not to take, but rather to keep the bishop somewhere like c7 or b6, so
Hmm.
somewhere attacking this pawn. So taking would just be better for white's pawn structure and more central control. Now, what do you think are the plans now that all of these pieces are developed? Does it
Oh,
feel better? Does it feel the same?
much better. Now I have the feeling that I can. So first of all, we castled already. We're quite secure. There's no pin anymore. And actually, I have the feeling we can go forward now. It may be b4, knight b5. I mean, very, very obvious moves, but we can also think about trading a couple of things. I'm not sure how funky knight e5 is. That has to be calculated. But yeah,
Right.
I feel much nicer with white at the moment.
No, those are really good points, and you're right about most of these suggestions. B4 is okay. Knight B5 is definitely good. That's actually what he played. Well, the computer played, and Knight E5 is usually a place that you want your knight to go
Hmm.
in this pawn structure. So it's good if you can ever get that. There's also even some possibilities of d5. It's here, computer kind of likes it, but it's a bit sketchy to give up a pawn just like that.
Yeah.
So even d5 is possible at the right moment, as we know from these structures with the isolated queen pawn. But knight b5 is what actually happened. And then knight to e5. So both of the ideas that you said. So that one is very common in this, where if there's ever if black ever wants to take, that improves the pawn structure.
Oh yes, especially the spot to d6 looks great at one point maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually probably totally lost to allow the knight to d6.
Wow.
That's true. So instead, Kasparov castles. And now what I like about these positions usually is that the rooks have no problems connecting. They just kind of they come in together. You can choose whether they go e1, d1, c1, d1. You can choose. Here, not really with the bishop, but usually you can. And you could also separate black's pawns, so even this was an option. But deep blue preferred bishop to g5, and white has a pretty pleasant position, but of course a lot of play is left too. Then this was the first inaccuracy, bishop to b6, and probably he thought that this would be okay. Queen to d7 doesn't work because of knight d7, so black has to recapture with this pawn. Of course, like none of this
Uh-oh.
is forcing anymore, but it's just part of an interesting middle game that happened in this game. You might get something similar, but might also not. But it's nice to see what the computer, especially not modern time computer, but what that computer actually did in this type of middle game. So now white is a bit more on the offensive side with some ideas against the black king, but it's still not easy to do it because actually this idea by Kasparov is not like it's not to be attacked, it's that he wants to attack. He wants to play king here and play rook here.
Now I
So
get it. Okay.
don't mistake it for Kasparov wanting to defend. It's actually more of an attacking idea on his end. So first though, one more attack on d4.
Yeah, obviously you cannot take b4 because there is always the queen check on g4.
Exactly. Yeah, white wins a piece there. So one more attack happened. Black ruined the pawn, white ruined the pawn structure a little bit more. And now, upon a few more moves, there is a very common positional idea that white went for here. You know already that when you have an isolated queen pawn, one of the main things is finding the right time to push it.
Yeah,
So
now's the
you,
right time.
yeah, but have you seen this idea of kind of sometimes sacrificing this pawn or exchanging it for something with d5?
I think so, but I have to figure out what it is right now because for now I can. Oh, well, okay, now I get it. You just take the pawn on b6 and get some advantage maybe to take on b7 and so on.
Almost, almost.
Oh, I
So
was wrong.
No, it is that, but it's actually a slightly deeper idea. It's kind of a positional sacrifice in the sense that you don't get the b6 pawn right away.
Okay.
So if this, then yes, queen b6 right away. But if rook takes, and e takes, then the pawn on b2 is also hanging right away if you take. Position is equal and it's fine. But the computer found a really excellent move, b3. And basically the claim is that white is going to try to take on b6 anyway. If everything works out, of course. But if not, then these pawns are very like separated, so you'll end up getting one of them eventually. So yeah, that's the interesting positional sacrifice there. Something like d4 doesn't work because of knight d4.
That's a cute little
Yes,
pin.
so he decided to just go for that attacking idea with rook to g8 right away. Now there's definitely some threats with queen g5, attacking both the rook and a mate.
That's
And
convincing.
yeah, and from here on, I really felt bad for how much Kasparov had to calculate himself while the computer, calculates it so, quickly and has no fear on his king, because usually as the white player, you would already start to get concerned,
Yeah.
but not as the computer, I guess. So he plays slight inaccuracies once more, Kasparov here, with previously allowing this, but also d4 now is a mistake. If he had played this, it would have still been more unclear to,
Because you couldn't take d5 now.
yeah, you couldn't before. Now you can, but there's stuff around the
Yeah,
king as
that's
well.
not happening.
Yeah, so he plays instead d4 though to try to create that pawn as well. And I think in this situation, a lot of humans would not go for pawns on b7 because that looks like the least relevant pawn
Yeah.
in this position. But of course, that's kind of the difference where computers are not afraid of such things psychologically as a human would be. So he actually just ends up taking that pawn without any problem and getting rid of all of black's threats. The queen is protecting, and so far nothing. The pawn goes to g3, and there's definitely some cool lines, maybe even like queen f4,
That's
rook
what I thought of
c8.
immediately.
If anything
Oh,
like that happens, of course, it's just insane that it happens, but white has everything under control. So there's a lot to calculate there
yeah.
as well. But
F6
in the
didn't
actual,
work because of knight d6. It looks really, really good for white in the position just now. Yeah.
yeah, that too, that too. So instead, knight d3, though, from black, he also tries to do that. But you are right that knight d6 is now coming with a huge threat of knight f7. And
Oh,
even though this is allowed, and white is one move away from checkmate
so
here, but
close.
the computer calculated everything until the end. And after these checks and more checks, knight to f3, and the mate threat is now gone. And black is just too much behind on material, with also a lot of threats on the king. So this was a really cool game in the Alapin. Of course, it's not always so volatile and like you would see in this game between the computer and Kasparov, but I thought it was a really interesting, not only historic game, but also one that shows us some of the main plans in the Alapin variation, how to place the pieces both in the opening and in the middle game. And yeah, that's the type of games that I show in the course, and I really enjoyed it myself with like learning about it and showing more because like I said, you could get some calm positions, you could get some aggressive positions, and I kind of like employing it in my own games as well. It's a really fun opening, and I hope anybody watching enjoys it as well.
I'm almost certain that every fan or everybody who is watching our show already has this chess-based training course in their hands. But if not, this is a short reminder. You can still get it. Don't worry, it's gonna stay here, and it's absolutely worth it. Thank you so much, Svitlana.